David A. Slagle from Lawrenceville, Georgia, tells a wild story about an experience he had. He said, "I served as a nurse in the operating room for several years. One day, a couple arrived, both with gunshot wounds. He had awakened late for his first day on the job because his wife did not set the alarm. He expressed his displeasure by shooting her in the arm. Not to be outdone, she retreated to another room, got a shotgun, and shot him in the arm. As I gathered their paperwork in the preoperative unit, I heard something one would only expect to hear in a country song. Separated by a deputy sheriff and handcuffed to their respective stretchers, the husband began, 'I love you, baby, and I'm sorry I shot you.' The wife responded, 'I love you too, baby, and I'm sorry I shot you.' Two little brothers, Harry and James, had finished supper and were playing until bedtime. Somehow, Harry hit James with a stick, and tears and bitter words followed. Charges and accusations were still being exchanged as their mother prepared them for bed. She said, 'Now, boys, what would happen if either of you died tonight and you never had the opportunity again to forgive one another?' James spoke up, 'Well, okay, I'll forgive him tonight, but if we're both alive in the morning, you'd better look out.' In Dadeville, Alabama, a man shot and killed another man because he was better at quoting the Bible. They were arguing over a subject, and one man became so jealous and angry because he couldn't keep up quoting scriptures with the other man, he shot and killed him. There seems to be an epidemic of anger these days. If we add a D to the word anger, we have the word danger. We are in a dangerous situation if we have anger stored up in our hearts. Jesus addresses this in Matthew chapter 5, verses 21 through 26, if you would read with me. Matthew 5, 21 through 26. "You have heard that it was said to the people long ago, 'Do not murder, and if anyone who murders will be subject to judgment.' But I tell you that anyone who is angry with his brother will be subject to judgment. Again, anyone who says to his brother, 'Raca,' is answerable to the Sanhedrin. But anyone who says, 'You fool,' will be in danger of the fire of hell. Therefore, if you are offering your gift at the altar, and there remember that your brother has something against you, leave your gift there in front of the altar. First go and be reconciled to your brother. Then come and offer your gift. Settle matters quickly with your adversary who is taking you to court. Do it while you are still with him on the way, or he may hand you over to the judge, and the judge may hand you over to the officer, and you may be thrown into prison. I tell you the truth, you will not get out until you have paid the last penny." We have here the first of 6 contrasts that Jesus makes. He begins, "You have heard," and then he says, "But I tell you." Jack Lewis wrote that the contrasts are to be understood as intensifications of the law and not as antitheses to set forth by a new Moses. None annuls the demands of the law. Jesus sets forth no conflict with the law, but gives a deepening and completion of it. In our text this evening, Jesus talks about murder, and then he talks about the attitude that would lead to murder. He speaks of angry thoughts. Now, not all anger is wrong. There is a righteous anger. William Evans observed, "A man who is incapable of being angry at sin is at the same time incapable of having a real love for righteousness. William Barclay said, "It is the long-lived anger. It is the anger of the man who nurses his wrath to keep it warm. It is the anger over which a person broods, and which he will not allow to die. It is the anger which will not forget, the anger which refuses to be pacified, the anger which seeks revenge." Jesus says, you've heard it said to the people long ago, do not murder. That's in the Ten Commandments. Pretty clear. He says anyone who murders is going to be subject to judgment. There was a death penalty in the law of Moses for murder. And then he says, but I tell you. And he speaks of this anger. Anger. An emotion that is allowed to fester, to stay out of control, to get out of control. And so Jesus went behind the sin of murder to the attitude of heart that can result in murder. That which leads to sin may very well be sinful. Larry Chenard commented, the surpassing righteousness which Jesus upholds extends to every thought and action that is destructive of the bond that unites people under the reign of God. Angry thoughts and insulting words may not lead to actual murder. However, in God's sight, they are the same as murder. John writes, anyone who hates his brother is a murderer, and you know that no murderer has eternal life in him. We could call this thought murder. It's dangerous to think or say, I wish you were dead. There are eternal consequences for anger and insult. Someone said, sow a thought and you reap an act, sow an act and you reap a habit, sow a habit and you reap a character, sow a character and you reap a destiny. So Jesus tells us to be careful about our thoughts. How many actual murders have been committed because people thought for a long time about how they would like for that person to be dead? Jesus also has something to say about angry words. A.B. Bruce said, Raka expresses contempt for a man's head. It's kind of like saying, you stupid. It more expresses contempt for his heart and character. You scoundrel. We do need to be careful what we say to each other. Someone has called this tongue murder. Some people are very careless in what they say to other people, sometimes even to family members. R.B.G. Tasker said, the man who tells his brother that he is doomed to hell is in danger of hell himself. People very flippantly just curse someone, go to hell, or damn you. I'll be careful about that. Our words matter. Now we notice an increasing intensity in the text. Jesus says, be careful what you say. Be careful of your relationship with others. Said you might end up being taken before the Sanhedrin. You might end up being turned over to the officer. You might end up being in prison. This could escalate. There's this increasing intensity moving from a local court to the Sanhedrin. And the implication is that expressing anger has more serious consequences than feeling anger. Sometimes we do feel angry. We need to get that under control. It's very good if we get it under control before we express that anger, before we say something to a person that is hard to take back. In his book, The Power Zone, Dr. Larry Calvin wrote an article that can help us understand that words can damage people. He wrote several years ago, a young lady walked into my counseling center. She was 25 years old, 5 foot 2 inches tall, and weighed under 100 pounds. When she was asked to describe herself, every word she used was a fat word. While we were thinking she needed intravenous feeding, she was seeing herself as fat. Her daily diet was 3 grapes and a teaspoonful of grape nuts. And after eating that, she felt bloated. In the process of treating her, we learned of the verbal abuse she endured as a child. She recalled one incident that occurred when she was about 11 years old. She had sneaked off one Saturday to go to the mall to meet a boy her age. They had a Coke and walked around holding hands in the mall, looking in store windows. Her brother had ratted on her, so when she got home, her dad started yelling at her. Among other things her dad said that day was one sentence she had never forgotten. Her dad said, "I don't see what the boys see in you anyway, as fat as you are." Every time she looked in the mirror, she hears the sentence and sees a fat nobody. Words that should not have been spoken, words that should not have been thought. A boy once asked his father, "Dad, how did wars begin?" The father replied, "Well, son, take World War I, for instance. It all started when Germany invaded Belgium." Immediately, his wife interrupted him. "That's not how it happened. It began when the Archduke was murdered." The husband scowled and snapped back, "Are you answering the question or am I?" Turning with a huff, the wife stormed from the room, slamming the door on her way out. When the dishes finally stopped rattling in the cupboard, an uneasy silence followed. After a moment, the silence was broken by the boy who said, "Dad, you don't have to tell me anymore. I know now." He figured out how war started from just his parents' conversation. George W. Martin tells the following true story. He says, "I remember a fellow who once wrote a nasty letter to his father. Since we worked in the same office, I advised him not to send it because it was written in a fit of temper. But he sealed it and asked me to put it in the mail. Instead, I simply slipped it into my pocket and kept it until the next day. The following morning, he arrived at the office looking very worried. 'George,' he said, 'I wish I'd never sent that note to my dad yesterday. It hurts me deeply, and I know it will break his heart when he reads it. I'd give $50 to get it back.' Taking the envelope from my pocket, I handed it to him and told him what I'd done. He was so overjoyed that he actually gave me the $50. We need to watch what we say. Words matter. They hurt if they're the wrong kind of words. And we notice that Jesus has something to say about the need for speedy reconciliation. There are 2 illustrations. One concerns a brother, that would be a spiritual brother, as well as a physical brother. One even concerns an enemy. If you're offering your gift at the altar and there remember that your brother has something against you, leave your gift there in front of the altar. First go and be reconciled to your brother, then come and offer your gift. If we have a problem with a family member, with a friend, with a brother or sister in Christ, it can affect our worship. And someone well put it, if you have a problem, straighten it out. Worship can wait. It's a very sad thing when you hear congregations, and I know of one quite well. They've gone through some problems, we're still going through them. And it was actually said that basically they had two sections of pews, and one side of the group sat on one on the other, and some even made faces at the other side. I wonder how much worship was getting to God with those kind of attitudes. Straighten out matters between you and your brother. Then the other is settle matters quickly with your adversary. He may be taking you to court. Says if he's doing that, you try to correct it before you get there. And then you will avoid a lot of trouble if you can do that. And we notice that in both of these instances, a key word is quickly. Be reconciled quickly. And isn't that just the opposite of what we usually do? We have a problem with somebody. They have a problem with us. We just let it go on and on and on. There's a big difference in trying to get rid of a tree sapling versus trying to get rid of a full-grown tree. John Stott said, "Yet how seldom do we heed Christ's call for immediacy of action. If murder is a horrible crime, malicious anger and insult are horrible too. And so is every deed, word, look, or thought by which we hurt or offend a fellow human being. We need to be more sensitive about these evils." It is said that when Leonardo da Vinci was painting The Last Supper, he had an intense, bitter argument with a fellow painter. Leonardo was so enraged that he decided to paint the face of his enemy into the face of Judas. That way, the hated painter's face would be preserved for ages in the face of the betraying disciple. When Leonardo finished Judas, everyone easily recognized the face of the painter. Leonardo continued to work on the painting, but as much as he tried, he could not paint the face of Christ. Something was holding him back. Leonardo decided his hatred toward his fellow painter was the problem. So he worked through his hatred by repainting Judas's face, replacing the image of his fellow painter with another face. Only then was he able to paint Jesus' face and complete the masterpiece.